Unsiloed podcast is produced by University FM, elevating the stories of your institution.
Welcome to Unsiloed. This is Greg LeBlanc, and I'm here today with Ellen Langer, who is a professor of psychology at Harvard University and also the author of a number of books. Perhaps most famously, your classic book called Mindfulness, right, which introduced the world, at least introduced me to this notion of mindfulness, and then lots of other books since then, including The Power of Mindful Learning, which I don't have with me. This one on becoming an artist, which actually comes with lots of fun pictures of your work. This one called Counterclockwise, which talks about the famous study and then implications of it. And the most recent book is called The Mindful Body, right, which builds on all of your work. But I think it really brings home this idea that mindfulness isn't just about your mind, right? In fact, the whole term mindfulness seems to imply, some kind of dualism, which you are working to overcome. So first of all, welcome, Ellen. Glad to have you with me.
Thank you, Greg.
Now, I guess where I want to start is, this term mindfulness has entered into the popular culture, right? I mean, it's everywhere. I mean,
everywhere.
People talk about it all the time, but it's usually associated with meditation, and it's also associated with kind of Eastern, kind of religious practices. But when you introduced the term, I mean, you weren't thinking about those things, or at least not exclusively about those things. You were thinking about a much broader idea, and it's this idea of living a life of engagement, right? And living a life where you are noticing and questioning, right? Continuously. And when you describe this life, of course, it sounds wonderful, right? I mean, I bought in hook, line, and sinker. But I guess one of the questions that I would have is, and you're also a big fan of Herb Simon. Big question is, well, why isn't this the default, right? I mean, as human beings, why do people live on autopilot? And Herb Simon, of course, would argue that, well, it takes effort. But you say that it doesn't require effort. It's actually effortless, and in fact, instead of using energy, it's energizing. Now, if that's true, then how do we explain why so many people live on autopilot?
Okay, well, there's so many things you said. I thought you were just going to go through all of my work and I wouldn't have to say anything, and I'm not sure which parts to comment on. So let me start by just telling people how I define mindfulness. And then we have 45 years of hard studies to back it up. And then I'll answer your question if I remember it. All right, so let me repeat it just so we remember it. Why, if mindfulness is so good for you, and I hope we get a chance to tell people just how good it is, isn't that the default? Why don't I start with that? All right. I think mindfulness would be the default if we weren't explicitly trained to be mindless. And so I don't know where to begin with all of this, but I'll get back to that with some of the examples that I'll use, okay? First, people need to understand mindfulness has nothing to do with meditation. Meditation is not about mindfulness. Meditation is a practice you engage in to result in post-meditative mindfulness. Mindfulness, as we study it, is immediate. All right, and it's not a practice, it's a way of being. Once you recognize that you don't know, and people don't realize, in fact, one of my definitions of mindlessness is being frequently in error, but rarely in doubt. People think they know, they don't. When you recognize, and I'll give some examples to help people realize they don't, and you don't have to feel bad about not knowing because nobody knows. You can't know because everything is always changing. Everything looks different from different perspectives. All right. So if you don't know, then you naturally tune in. I mean, your listeners, if they knew what I was going to say next, why bother listening? All right. So another way of getting there, because it's hard since we've all been taught that we know things that in fact we don't know, but we believe we do, to just tell yourself, well, I don't know anything. So a way to come to see that is to simply actively notice new things about the things you think you know. And then you'll see you don't know them as well as you thought you did, and your attention naturally goes to them. So I'm almost tired of using this example, but I can't help myself. I ask people, I'll ask you, Greg, how much is 1 + 1?
I know the answer to this.
Okay, right, but
Of course,
dutifully,
it depends.
right.
I've
So
been
wait.
trained
So
that the answer to every
the
question
show
is
goes well. You're going to say 1 + 1 is 2. That's what we've all been taught. I use that as an example because that's the one thing everybody is sure of. But it turns out 1 + 1 is not always 2. If you add one cloud plus one cloud, 1 + 1 is 1. One pile of laundry plus one pile of laundry, 1 + 1 is 1. 1 wad of chewing gum plus 1 wad of chewing gum. In the real world, 1 + 1 doesn't equal 2 as or more often as it does. All right, now, and you already gave your listeners the answer, that if after this interview, somebody, very remote but possibility, but someone comes up to you and says, hey, how much is 1 + 1? You're no longer going to just mindlessly say 2. What you're going to do is pay some attention to the context, and then you'll say, it could be 2, which is very, very different. In a could be world, a conditional world, a maybe world, you sit up and you notice. And all we've been taught are absolutes. That goes to answer the other question you asked me. So I'm going in circles now, but that's okay. Linear is boring. Why is it the default? Why isn't mindfulness the default? So if you're taught in school 1 + 1 is 2, horses don't eat meat. Everything that we're taught, we now think we know. And so we don't need to pay any attention. But all that we know that was based on science, for example, science can only give us probabilities. That means if you were to do the exact same study again, which you never do exactly the same, but let's assume, if you could do the exact same study again, you're likely to get the same finding. That's translated by schools, the media, parents, everybody, as absolutes. Okay, so again, if you know it absolutely, why pay attention? If it may be true, then you have to see in this context, is it true? And this simple act of noticing turns out it's the essence of engagement. It's what you do when you're feeling your best. When you're at play, you're noticing new things. If you did same old, play would hardly be fun. All right, so it's energy begetting. 45 years of our research shows that it's literally and figuratively enlivening. So in early studies, we made elders more mindful and they lived longer. We have lots of studies that I hope I get to talk about in the mindful body that again make clear the consequences of being there. You know, if you're going to do something, you should show up for it. And when you do show up for it, everything is better. So as you're actively noticing, you look alive. People find you more attractive. When you're being mindful, people see you as charismatic, authentic, certainly attractive. Not only that, so it makes you healthier. It's fun. People are going to find you more appealing, but it actually leaves its imprint in the things that we do. They're just better. So if you're painting, playing a musical instrument, writing a report, no matter what you're doing, if you show up for the activity, you're going to produce something better. So to my mind, there's no reason, once people truly understand what this work is about, that you would not try to to change your ways in some sense and be mindful virtually all the time. So you see, people mistaken. I'm on a roll now, Greg. So, okay, so people, when I say to people, be mindful all the time, they shudder a little bit because they confuse being mindful with thinking. And thinking has also gotten a bad rap. Thinking is fun. What's not fun is thinking that you're not going to get the answer. And so it becomes stressful. But the process of thinking is good for you. And, so they say, you're saying it's never good to be mindless? I say no. The only time it's good to be mindless is if two conditions are met. One, you found the very best way of doing something. And two, nothing changes. Clearly, both of those are wrong. So it's still not persuade. I say, okay, let's say you've got a 2-year-old. I don't know, a 2-year-old's fine, why not? And you're in a park, and the child now steps into the street. Are you telling me, Professor Langer, that it's not better just to mindlessly grab the kid to bring him out of harm's way? And I say, yes, that's what I'm telling you. First of all, if you were mindful, the child wouldn't end up in the street in the first place. Secondly, that the difference in timing between doing something mindful and mindless are nanoseconds. All right, so it doesn't take any longer. If you pull the child out of the road mindfully, you very well may notice the direction the car is actually moving in. And so you don't want to grab the child and go to the right if that's where the car is going. So you're likely to have a better outcome whenever you're mindful.
Well, I think this mindful perspective is one that aligns with the best of the scientific perspectives, right? Where all conclusions are provisional. It
Well,
also aligns.
but Greg, that's science in theory, not
Right. The
science in
best.
practice.
That's
In
right.
practice, people do their studies, they get a probabilistic answer, and in their mind, it's absolute. The one that changed my whole life was many, many years ago. I was at a horse event, and this man asked me, would I watch his horse for him because he wants to go get his horse a hot dog? Well, you know, your audience doesn't know I'm Harvard Yale all the way through. I know for sure horses are herbivorous, they don't eat meat. He comes back with the hot dog, and the horse ate it. And at that moment, I realized everything I thought I knew could be wrong, which would worry some people. For me, it was very exciting because it opened up a world of possibilities. All those things that you think can't be, I now question. And many of those are actually reported in The Mindful Body.
But it's also in alignment, I think, with the best of the artistic perspective, right? Which
Yes.
is about, continually shifting your point of view, right?
Yeah. So those people who are painting by numbers, metaphorically, it's not true for them.
Right.
But for those who, you see, when you're painting, it's sort of the way you should be in your entire life. You could have a general plan as to what to do, but you can't be certain what to do. Because you want to shift gears as the circumstances or the painting as you've created it thus far suggest you should do. And too often, we start out at point A with a clear plan. We're going to go to point B. And the circumstances have just changed, and we shouldn't be at point B any longer. But people mindlessly go. When people are mindless, they're more or less acting like automatons. And when you're mindful, you have a general sense of what you want to do. You can have goals, routines, but they're guiding what you're doing. They're not overly determining what you're doing. So I say to my students, okay, let's say on your way to class today, you run into Michelle Obama, and she takes such a liking to you for who knows what reason. And she says, do you want to go have a cup of coffee? It would be crazy for you to say, no, I have to go to class. All right. But I think mindlessly, especially the A students, that's just what they would do. Rather than say, well, circumstances now are so unusual, I should take advantage of them. And so when you're mindful, because you're there, you get to take advantage of opportunities to which you'd otherwise be blind, and you avoid the danger not yet arisen. And, everything in some sense can become an opportunity, but we just don't see it. When people are mindful, they're aware there are multiple answers to every question, multiple ways of looking at things. And so you tend not to be stressed because stress is not a function of events. It's a function of the view you take of events. So if you take a mindless, oh my God, the sky is falling view, of course, you're not going to be happy about it. So, yeah, everything changes, virtually everything.
Now, look, as
And
I'm
it's
an
so
economist, so
easy.
I need to talk about trade-offs, right? So,
There's no
so
trade-off.
well, okay. So, presumably, the reason why people aren't mindful is that they find something attractive or seductive in mindlessness, right? I mean,
I think that much of the time our mindlessness is driven by fear,
hmm,
stress, and fear. And so if you're in an organization and you're expected to do things a certain way, people are afraid to deviate from that. And so you end up staying put rather than advancing the way you might otherwise. What people need to realize, and so few do, is that everything was at one point a decision. For something to be a decision means there was uncertainty. All right. Now, what happens is you're making some decision. There's all this uncertainty. You don't know what to do. Then you finally decide on something, and from that moment forward, people act as if that answer, the choice that you made, was handed down from the heavens. Um, so the point that I'm making is there are always different ways, many ways, some great fun of doing whatever it is you're doing. And, we have very strange notions, but they're all very mindless. And I think they help instantiate the power structure. The people in power don't want people to realize that, they're but for, they too could have been on top. And people need to understand that work, most people presume work has to be stressful. It doesn't have to be stressful. And then you have the experts who try to tell people, well, you should work out work-life balance. Now, work-life balance is certainly better than work-life imbalance, but it's not nearly as good as it can be is if you integrate yourself, your work, and your play. So it's all one. And so I'm sure you enjoy what you're doing. I know I enjoy what I'm doing. It's not, oh, well, now I have to do this terrible thing, but I'll get through it and then I'll have the weekend, and so on. People don't realize that there is an interesting, if not fun, way of doing virtually everything. There's this wonderful video, I don't know if you've ever seen it, called Piano Stairs. These people, I think they were from Scandinavia, but I'm not sure, went down in a subway. So in all of the subway stations, oddly, around the world, it turns out there's a set of stairs, and next to the stairs is the escalator. Everybody takes the escalator, except the young boy
Right.
who's, racing to the gym, but virtually everybody's taking, okay.
No,
Then
even people going to the gym sometimes take the escalator.
Oh, I mean,
There's a
the
great
funniest
picture of
sign
this.
I ever saw was I was in this building, and right next to the stairs, posted right outside the elevator, would said, "Stairmaster on the third floor." And then people still took the elevator to go work out on this. At any rate, what they did was they laid a piano keyboard basically on the stairs. So now going up the stairs, you're making music, whatever. All right. In almost no time, everybody leaves the escalator aside, and now everybody is taking the stairs. And what I tell my students, why wait for somebody to do that? You can, in your head, make it a game as you're going up the stairs. Everything can be fun. But when we're led to believe that, there's a way you're supposed to be at work, and that's serious, and so on, people overlook ways to make things fun. And so if you're making it fun, turns out that you're being mindful, the neurons are firing, and it's literally and figuratively life-giving.
Well, you've talked about the illusion of control, and the illusion of certainty, and the illusion of predictability. I mean, is there something there's something therapeutic about those illusions?
Yes, sure. If you believe that you should know and you don't know, and you're going to be somehow punished in some way for not knowing. Yeah, not knowing is scary. It's stressful. When you realize, and I'm freeing all of your audience, no one knows. People pretend. But since everything is changing, everything looks different from different perspectives, you can't know. So prediction. It's very interesting because people are very good at looking back at what they've done and making sense out of it. And so they mistakenly think that it's the same thing going forward. You can't predict. Okay. I mean, just ask your listeners, is my internet going to go out or not? What are they going to, who knows, right? All right. So I say to my class, this is an advanced class in decision making, that I have taught a version of this class for 45 years. What is the likelihood? Predict the likelihood I'm going to be here next week. So we go around the room. It's a small seminar. And these are Harvard students, so they say silly things, very smart kids, though. 97%. I don't know how they come to a number like 97 because they know you're not supposed to say 100%. So everybody gives these odd answers. They're all, 96, 97, 98, 99. I say, okay. So they're all saying they're sure I'm going to be there. Now I say, okay, what I want you to do, and we'll go around the room, and I want each of you to give me a good reason why I won't be here next week. The first person, and it's amazing, no matter how many times I do this, the first person always says, well, you've always been here, you deserve the time off. The next person says your dog has to go to the vet. The next person says you got a flat tire. And we keep going. Now we have 12, 16, depends on the size of the class, good reasons why I won't be there. And then I ask people, okay, now tell me, what is the likelihood I'm going to be here next week? And the 100% drops to 50%. So an example that might make it clearer to people. You're at a party and you see Tom and Susie fighting. And if I said to you at that point, are they going to get a divorce? You'd say, how do I know, right? People fight. But now let's say we didn't have that conversation. So you're at a party, you see Tom and Susie going at each other. 2 weeks later, you find out they're getting a divorce. I knew it, but you didn't know it, right? Looking back, it all makes perfect sense. And so we mistakenly think that we can predict going forward. Now, if you think about it, if you can't predict, then the whole notion of decision-making becomes crazy, right? Because decision-making relies on prediction, that whatever your choices are, that your reaction to them is going to be the same as the last time. Otherwise, how would you even begin the whole process, right? And so for that and so many other reasons that people can read about in The Mindful Body, I suggest that instead of wasting your time being stressed over making the right decision, you make whatever decision first occurs to you, flip a coin, choose the first thing that comes to you, the last alternative given. All right, so don't worry about what decision you make, but then make the decision right.
Yeah, I know you said what. Don't make the right decision.
Don't worry about
making. Right.
Don't worry about making the right decision. Make the decision right.
Now, look, there was a psychologist.
Are you going to ask me something hard?
There was a psychologist a couple thousand years before you that said that the unexamined life is not worth living.
Yes, that was my guy.
Yeah, and so I don't think that you're making the case that one should not use rules of thumb or that one should not have.
Oh no,
habits,
not at all. Not
right?
at all. What I'm saying is that let the rules of thumb be, sort of. I'll try this. Why not? Not that this is the way. This is the only way, and feeling then that if you don't know the only way, you end up stressed, which I think, by the way, is the major cause of most illness. So big consequences, and much of our stress comes from thinking we should know, and when I'm telling you there's no way to know.
Right. Now, there was another psychologist who appeared in Shakespeare at one point who said, there's no good or bad except thinking makes it so. And I think that, that could have been the sort of subtitle of your new book in a way, right?
It certainly would have been a chapter. Yeah, no, I mean, and Epictetus, before Shakespeare, I believe, said, not in English, but events don't cause stress. What causes stress are the views you take of events. But the problem is that so many of us are brought up in a world where we're taught this is good, this is bad. If it's good, I have to jump over hurdles, move people out of the way to get to it. If it's bad, I have to race past it, away from it, and recognizing that it is neither good nor bad. You get to interpret it. And so for me, it doesn't matter what happens. Life is so good. I use this example too often also, but why not? So you and I go out for dinner. And that's a compliment, Craig, because most of the time while I'm telling the story, we're going out for lunch. Okay, so
okay.
you and I go. You and I
can get some wine, right?
You and I go out for dinner, and the food is good. Wonderful. It's a win. You and I go out for dinner, and the food is awful. Wonderful. It'll be better for my waistline, and I'll pay more attention to what you're saying rather than the food. So everything, no matter what, has more than just an upside. When people think an upside, they think that the downside is greater, but at least there's the saving factor. No, there's no upside, there's no downside. It's all a function of our thoughts. So yes, thinking makes it so.
So you talk a lot about labeling, right? Now there's this huge literature on priming, obviously, and whether we call it priming or whether we call it labeling, this impacts how you subjectively experience the world. But I mean, you argue that it has a much bigger impact and can even influence your
Everything.
physiological experience.
Yeah. Well, there are so many ways for me to approach that. First of all, when you talk about priming, the counterclockwise study was one of the first, if not the first, priming study. And this was also, let me shift gears slightly to put it all in context. This was all about a test of the mind-body unity theory. And let me tell you where that came from. All right. So this book, The Mindful Body, started off as a memoir. So there are lots of very personal stories in it. And it turns out that I'm probably the only person who has 2 pancreas stories, but it helps tell you how all of us evolved. So I was married when I was very young, and we went to Paris on our honeymoon. So I was 19 going on 30. So I was a woman of the world. Now we go to this restaurant and I ordered this dish, and on the dish was pancreas. And I asked my then husband to tell me which of these things was the pancreas. And he points to something. And now I'm eating everything else, dreading the moment when I'm going to be faced with eating that pancreas. But I had to do it because, after all, I was now a married woman of the world. So I start eating it, and I'm getting sick, literally getting sick. He starts laughing. I say, "Why are you laughing?" He said, "Because that's chicken. You ate the pancreas a long time ago." All right. So I didn't at that moment develop the mind-body unity theory, but how could it be that I just think something is what it isn't, and it has such a profound effect on me? The other pancreas story was my mother had breast cancer that had metastasized to her pancreas. And as you may know, that's the end game. And then magically it was gone. And the medical world couldn't explain it. And so lots of my life's work has been about finding a way to explain that. And so people bought into the medical model. The medical model decades ago said that it's nice to be happy. I'm sure they were always pleased for people to be happy, stress-free, whatever. But the only way, according to the medical model, of becoming sick was the introduction of an antigen. Okay, now that changed over time, and now we have the mind and body, but they're supposed to be connected. And you still have the problem. How are they connected? How do you get from this fuzzy thing called a thought to something material called the body? And that has slowed down progress quite a bit. So I come along and I say, wait a second, mind, body, these are just words. Let's put them back together. And then if you have the mind and body as a single unit, wherever you're putting the mind, you're necessarily putting the body. And that would explain the spontaneous remission that my mother experienced. It would explain my feeling sick to my stomach on that honeymoon, and a host of other things. So now with the belief that mind and body are a single unit, wow, that opens up wonderful possibilities. Wherever you put your mind, you're necessarily putting your body. So I have many, many studies, some of which I'll tell you about. They're all reported in the Mindful Body, to test this. And the first one was called the Counterclockwise study. This was also the first priming study, I believe. All right. What we did was we took old men, gave them lots of tests beforehand. And these were people who, they were not functioning very well. Okay. They really looked old. And we had them live in a retreat that had been retrofitted to 20 years earlier. And they were going to live there as if they were their younger selves. All right. They were going to be discussing events from the past as if they were just happening, and so on. So everything said to them, this was then. Right. So we're priming their younger selves. And so when you're in your younger self mind, you don't have the limits that you have when you get older, right? You get older, you expect to fall apart. You're looking for forgetting things and all sorts of negative changes. So we bypass all of that. We have them live for a week as if they're their younger selves. As a result, without any medical intervention, their vision improved, their hearing improved, their memory, their strength, and they looked noticeably younger. So then we go on, that was done quite a while ago. Now we have many new studies testing this mind-body unity. The next one in the series was done with chambermaids. So it's interesting, chambermaids are exercising all day long. They don't see it as exercise because the Surgeon General, and I don't know why they would know what the Surgeon General says, but they all seem to, work is what, exercise is what you do after work, and they're too tired, okay? So all we do is randomly divide them into two groups. And we're going to teach one of the groups that their work is exercise. You know, mopping is like working on this machine at the gym, making a bed on this other machine, and so on. So now we have two groups. All right, we took lots of measures before we did it and lots of measures afterwards. We make sure the groups are not eating any differently. They're not working any harder, one group or the other. All that's different is the belief, the mindset that work is exercise. As a result of this change in mindset, they lost weight. There was a change in waist to hip ratio, body mass index, and their blood pressure came down. Okay, so then we go further. I'm not going to give you all of them, but some of them are real fun. Let's say, which one? We'll do the diabetes. So we take people with type 2 diabetes, they come in, we give them many, many tests, and then we're going to have, and this won't be clear until the end, okay, we're going to have them play computer games, and they're going to be asked to change the game they're playing on the computer every 15 minutes or so. And that's to ensure that they'll pay attention to a clock next to the computer. Unbeknownst to them, the clock is rigged. So for a third of the people, it's going twice as fast as real time. For a third of the people, half as fast. And for a third of the people, it's real time. And the question we're asking is, does blood sugar level follow real time or perceived time? Perceived time in this case would be clock time. The answer is perceived time. We have people in a sleep lab. They wake up, again, we fool around with the clock. They think they got 2 hours more, 2 hours fewer, or the right amount of sleep. Biological and cognitive functions seem to follow perceived amount of sleep. Fatigue itself is really interesting. There have a lot of studies on fatigue. You know, people think, I mean, when you're exhausted, you're exhausted. It's a physical thing. There's nothing you can do about it. Well, so the first simple little test we did of this, we took people and we said, do 100 jumping jacks and tell me when you're tired. So they'd get tired around 70. We take a whole different group of people and we say, do 200 jumping jacks. Tell me when you're tired. They get tired at 140. That's kind of fun. All right. So now, and we have lots of studies that bear this out, that, you know, we begin a task, we have some overarching sense of how long it's going to be, and about, you know, 2/3 of the way we're exhausted. Half of the way we start getting tired. And I was reminded of a study I read many, many years ago that Frank Beach did. So he takes these little rats, a little boy rat and a little girl rat, and they're going to copulate. And then what happens is the little boy rat just can't take anymore. He needs a refractory period, unless you introduce immediately a new little girl rat, and then he's ready to go right, you know, right away. All right. So what is the moral of the story? If you change context, all of a sudden you get renewed energy. And so something I have recently been saying, people need, I asked my students in this health class, how far is it humanly possible to run? I mean, given people thinking fatigue is wired in and so on. And they know that a marathon is 26 miles, So these are Harvard students. They're very smart. So it becomes like an auction. Someone says 30, someone else 35, 40, 45, and it ends at 50. The person who says 50, everybody groans. Oh, it's ridiculous. Then I show them a video, a YouTube of the Tarahumara, a tribe in Mexico that are able to run over 200 miles without stopping. So the difference between 26 and 200 is enormous, right? And even 26 for people like me, it's hard to imagine that I could run a marathon. So the moral of the bottom line, in some sense, of all this work is that we are so far more capable than any of us realize. And we stop short and we get tired and we give up when we don't need to. And our language, this was something I'm very sensitive to language. And I have a lot of this in the book also, where over and over again, the world is not so good, then professionals tell you how to make it better. And we think that's it. But there's a whole other level to make it better still. So one of the things I find fun is trying. Trying sounds good, right? Because you compare it to somebody who's not trying. Well, not trying is bad. Trying is good. But if I said to you, here's an ice cream cone, try to eat it, that would be bizarre, right? So what does that mean? That means the idea of trying has built into it an expectation for failure. Everything. There's so many things in this culture that I find bizarre. So many, many years ago, I was asked if I'd give a sermon at one of the Harvard churches. I say yes to virtually everything. I'm Jewish. I don't spend time in churches. I'm not religious. So, oh my gosh, what am I going to talk about? And then I said, well, let me see. All right, forgiveness. That sounds sort of religious-y. It's not religious, but I could get away with it. So I started thinking about forgiveness, and I come up with something that some would say is sacrilegious. So, Greg, if you ask 10 people, is forgiveness good or bad? What are they going to say? It's good.
Most say good, yeah.
Yeah. Okay. If you ask a different 10 people, is blame good or bad? What are they going to say? It's bad, right?
Bad, yeah.
But so just think about it, because you can't forgive unless you first blame.
Yeah.
That's interesting. Our forgivers are our blamers. Now, do you blame people for good things or bad things? You blame people for bad things. So what do we have here? We have people who see the world negatively, who blame, then can forgive. Hardly divine. All right. So again, forgiving, once you blame, it's better to forgive than not forgive. But there's a better than better way, which is to basically understand why the person did what they did. Turns out that behavior makes sense from the perspective of the behaving person, or else they wouldn't do it. No one wakes up in the morning and says, today I'm going to be impulsive, bigoted, sloppy. I mean, so when you see people being, why? And when we're mindless, we tend only to see their behavior from that one perspective, the negative perspective often. So you might not like me because I'm so gullible, but that's because from my perspective, I'm trusting. I can't stand you, Greg, because you're just so inconsistent. That's because from your perspective, you're flexible. So it turns out that each and every negative description we have, there's an equally strong positive version of it. And so if you want to stop me from being gullible, what you need to do is get me to stop being trusting. And my guess is you'd rather that I be trusting and the problem goes away. If I want you to stop being so inconsistent, what I have, since you're not from your perspective going forward being inconsistent, you're being flexible. I have to get you to stop valuing being flexible. So there's a lot there, and when you go through, all of it, part of this book is about ways of changing our minds about things that are going to lead us to be stress-free and happy. Turns out those aren't trivial. That's crucial for our health, and and some of the other things that are encouraging ways of dealing with illness right from the start, and even preventing it.
Well, no, in business schools, we talk a lot about influencing others and getting others to see things in different ways. And your work is primarily about getting yourself to
Both,
see things
both.
in different
Yeah.
ways. But I remember I used to do a lot of work on research on placebos, and of course this is
Yeah.
deeply related to what you
Yes.
discussed
Now,
today.
placebos, I'm glad you brought it up because placebos, I think, may be our strongest medicine. You know, that I think a third of the people of virtually all diseases are cured with this sugar pill. And so you have to, if the pill is inert, if we know the pill is doing nothing, but you're getting better, why are you getting better? You're doing it yourself. And so my life's work, in some sense, has been to make that more direct, where you don't need somebody in a white jacket who's going to charge you to give you a nothing pill. Right. And so what we came up with is this attention to symptom variability. It's a mouthful, but it really means being mindful, because being mindful is noticing change. And so what we did across a host of very big disorders, Parkinson's, multiple sclerosis, chronic pain, and biggies, right? And what we do is we have people, okay, let me add something before I tell you what we did. For most of us, when you're given a diagnosis of some dread disease, you mindlessly assume it's going to either stay the same or get worse. But nothing moves in only one direction. There are always little blips,
Right, you either have the disease or you don't have the disease.
Yeah, and the pain,
Yeah.
let's say if you have pain, then the pain isn't going to go away. It's going to, stay there and possibly get worse over time. All right. And so what we did was to call people at different times in the course of the day, and we would say to them, is the symptom now better or worse than before? And why? And that why question is very important, because first, by doing this, the first thing that happens is you see it's not always awful. Sometimes it's better, so you feel good. Second, by looking for why now is it either better or worse, that initiates a mindful search. And as we've said now many times, that act of noticing, what could it be? What's the reason for it? Is itself good for your health. And third, to my view, you're more likely to find a solution if you're looking for one. And so we do this sometimes as little as 2 weeks, 3 weeks, and the symptoms go away. And, so I said it's to replace placebos, something you can do for yourself, but it sounds like we still have somebody doing, but we all have smartphones that are not always so smart, but you can set the phone to ring in an hour. And then ask yourself, is the symptom better or worse than before, and why? Then set it to ring in 2 hours and 10 minutes, just vary it across the day, across the week. And so you're doing yourself a favor. You're doing yourself several favors. The first, it feels good and is good for you to believe you have some control over the illness, that you might find a solution, and you may indeed find the solution. So there's nothing lost, and there are no negative side effects, hidden costs, or whatever you called them before.
Well, I used to think that placebo wasn't going to work if you knew it was a placebo, but in fact, it still works, right?
I had this experience. I used to get motion sick. So I would always take a Dramamine a half hour before the plane took off. I was giving a talk in Chicago, and I'm a big talker, as you can see. And I went on too long, and I was going to miss my flight. So there was no time for me to stop. But I grabbed a donut, as I'm getting on the plane. And it turned out the donut worked as well as the Dramamine. Yes. So, and of course, if the donut works as well, I probably don't need either. And so now I fly without expecting to get motion sick. But yeah, but it's hard for people. And most, those are a few open placebo studies that are interesting. I wanted to many years ago I was doing this with somebody, I've forgotten who, come up with a little bottle of pills that were marked placebo.
Yes.
With a little booklet that explained the efficacy of these pills, across all sorts of diseases, people getting better. And I think that they would have worked.
I would love to get into business with you.
Oh, yeah, sorry.
We could have the most expensive placebos
right
around, because they would definitely be the most effective.
Yeah.
But there's another concept you talk about, which is mindful contagion, and I found this
Yeah.
fascinating.
This is a little wild.
Yeah.
at one point, just between the two of us and whoever else is listening, at one point in writing the book, I had what I called the woo-woo chapter. And
That study about the in the air, I mean,
yeah,
that is,
yeah.
I've been,
And then I took out, a lot of it because I didn't want the strangeness of some of the work to in any way detract from the importance of all of the studies, many of which we've already discussed now. But the contagion, in a very simple way, that we have old data that when you're mindful, I already mentioned this to you, people find you more attractive, more charismatic, more authentic. All right. And so already just sort of imagine when you're with somebody, who's mindful, you feel safe. And when you feel safe, you're more likely to become mindful yourself. So there's that. Then we do studies. We have one study with people who are heavy drinkers. And the experimenter is either mindful or mindless. And of course, the participant doesn't know this. And they're allowed to drink as much as they want because we just want their opinion about, the wines. And the question is, will they drink less if the experimenter is mindful? And that's indeed what we find. Lots of people, I think that there are some things that people think are bad that have an upside that are wonderful. I think many heavy drinkers are especially sensitive to other people's consciousness. They're just intuitive. They just, can feel what's going on. And since most people are mindless, they need to dull that because that's a negative feeling. And I think that's a lot of what's going on, and they don't realize it. In evidence in this study. But then there are the weird ones where okay, I'll tell you one of them. I'm not sure that I should, but if not, you can always edit it out. Okay, so we have an empty space. We have people meditating in that space. Then the meditators leave. So now all you have is an empty room. Now the participants come into the room and we give them all sorts of tests to take. Versus the room was not occupied by meditators. Okay, and participants come in and they take the same tests. So the title of that paper is Something in the Air, because when they're in the room that was just occupied by people meditating, they score higher.
well, I think this is related to what you said about stress. And I did another podcast about how we can sense stress, right, through
Yeah.
perhaps through our sense of smell, but we can presumably smell the absence of stress, right? And
Mm-hmm.
if in fact stress is contagious, as we know it is, so too can
Yeah.
mindfulness.
No, that's good. I mean, if we remember always that the mind and body are one thing, then anything that's happening on any level is simultaneously happening on every level. We just don't have the technology or machinery, so to speak, to discern the difference. So, what I'm suggesting is that if you took a little piece of skin from somebody while they're mindful versus when they're mindless, it would be revealed in the skin, in the blood, in odor, everywhere, because it's all happening at the same time.
Now, what does this mean for our healthcare system? I mean, we spend about
Ah,
one out of every $5 of GDP on healthcare,
yeah.
yet we're not particularly healthy, right, as
That's
a country.
right. Yeah, good.
So,
I mean, if people paid attention, hopefully that people, if they read the book and they like it, they'll play it forward because the more people that find out, the healthier, in some sense, the whole country and eventually the world can become. Um, what it says about, well, first of all, just one of the things that I find uh, sad but humorous at the same time is that you go to the hospital to get better. Okay. It's the only reason you walk into it unless you're going to visit somebody. All right. And hospitals themselves make you stressed.
mhm.
And so the first way of making you better is to make you worse. Right. So in the book, I designed a mindful hospital that would be very, very different from the hospital that we have right now. So, okay, that's further down the road. What the work suggests right now is question the diagnosis, because the diagnosis, as you were suggesting before, is just a probability. You're told you have X. That just means many of the people who present that way have X. It doesn't really mean you necessarily have
Yeah,
X, because you
but how
can't
are you going to?
predict.
We would have to have probabilistic billing codes, right?
Yeah,
That's the
that would
problem. I
be.
mean, it's like, okay, I'm either going to bill for this or I'm going to bill for that, right?
Yeah, no, I think that's, it's very important. But imagine, the work that we have on the borderline effect. Okay, so no matter what the diagnosis is, and it doesn't matter if there were 35 tests that are all organized together and you have one number, there are some people who fall right above that number. So they've got it, whatever it is, cancer, diabetes, anything. And similarly, there are people who fall right below that number where the difference is not statistically meaningful. So at the beginning, they're the same, right? If you and I took an IQ test and you got a 70 and I got a 69, that would mean down the road that I'm cognitively challenged, which may be true. But the difference between 69 and 70 is meaningless, right? I could have sneezed, and so I misread the question. Um, okay, so at time one, there's no difference. But once you're given that diagnosis, you organize yourself, and you alluded to this before, very differently. And down the road, I would think, that if I were labeled cognitively challenged and you weren't, that it wouldn't take more than a month, if that long, where we'd be really different. First, when you have the label, you just don't engage in the activities that you would, because after all, you're the kind of person who shouldn't be doing it, and so on. Even a thing, I imagine much of what we believe about aging, is based on our mindless views of what happens as you get older. So if you're 25 years old and you hurt your wrist, you're told you're not supposed to have a wrist that hurts, so you do things, right? At my age, if I hurt my wrist, I could easily say, well, what do you expect? I'm 76 years old. At some point, you just fall apart. So then I don't do anything to heal. And then the difference between our wrists, a short time later, is not because I'm older, but it's simply because the belief that I'm older made it so I didn't think it made sense for me to do anything to make myself better. And
Yeah.
there's always things that we can be doing. And that's
Well,
another thing. The medical world has this notion, you're told your disease is uncontrollable. People need to understand all that means is that the medical world hasn't found a way to control it. Now, I don't have data for this, but I would be surprised if no matter what the disease, and we have one person who's exercising, feeling good, being happy, no stress, eating well, so on, and somebody else who is, thrown in the towel, that the disease would progress in the same way. So, if you hurt your arm, make sure your other arm is in good shape, and the rest of your body, and so on. And with a stronger body, you're going to be better able to heal to at least some extent, no matter what the illness is.
right. And so you mentioned how the hospital wouldn't even let you spend time with your dying mother after
Yeah.
5 p.m.
Okay,
or
so
whatever.
that's a whole different thing. It was funny. I gave a talk. This was last year to the prosem. That's the first year graduate students, and one of them came up after me, who was somebody who was working with me. He says, "They think you're a badass." I said, "I didn't know if that was good or bad," but it turned out that for them it was good. And people need to recognize that all of the rules that we mindlessly follow were just decisions made by some people, which was good for them. It doesn't mean I'm saying violate the rule, but if it doesn't work for you, it's important to question it. An example I use in my health classes, imagine that you have the people making the decision about which drugs to approve. Okay, so should they approve Viagra? Now imagine the people making this decision are all 50-year-old men versus a group of nuns. I mean, chances are the 50-year-old men are going to say, yes, reimburse. And the nuns are going to say, why? It's not essential. Okay. So they're all decisions. And for it to be a decision means there's uncertainty, which means that everything in some sense is mutable. Everything can be changed. And that's the piece that we don't pay enough attention to. You're faced with something that doesn't work for you. Almost always you can find a way to change it so that it does.
So how would this change the way we do medical education? I'm going to be teaching at Stanford Medical School starting next year.
And the first thing you should do is assign this book.
Okay.
And then bring me in as a guest lecturer, and I'll take all the nasty questions that you don't want to be bothered with. No, I think, first of all, I think medical people are aware that they don't know. All of us are aware when we don't know something. We're aware when we're guessing. And I think they would all be relieved. So I think not just medical education, all education should be made mindful. What does that mean? It should all be conditional. 1 and 1 often is 2. Not, horses typically don't eat meat. This bone often takes this long to heal. You don't know how long it's going to ever say to a patient, you have 6 months to live. I mean, it's criminal. There's no way that, first, you know enough about statistics, maybe the audience doesn't here, but you cannot predict to the individual case. And people know this intuitively. If I said, okay, let's go to a Mercedes parking lot, and let's say there are 100 Mercedes, and I say to you, choose one at random. It can be any one you want. And if it starts right away, I'll pay you. If it doesn't start right away, you give me your life savings. People are not going to take the bet because they know things happen. The best of it. I mean, Michael Jordan occasionally misses a shot when he throws, the basketball. All right. So whenever the doctor is talking to you as an individual, they cannot predict. So what they should be doing is telling you the data seem to suggest, but remember, those data were collected on different people. It takes so long for us to do these studies, Greg. That you do the study, it takes forever to analyze the results, to write it up, then you send it in, and then they don't like it, you have to rewrite it. This will take years. So from the time we knew the finding to the time you read about it, 4 or 5 years might have passed. And a lot can happen in that time. So I think people need to be made aware of that. We're doing a study now that you'll find fun, where we tell people we're doing it with different disorders. I wanted to start with broken bones, but I don't remember if that's one of the ones we're actually doing. When you have something, you're going to have surgery, you almost always ask the doctor, how long is it going to take to heal? And the doctor almost always either gives you the far end or the middle. Most people heal it. What we're doing in this study is giving people the shortest healing time. Okay. And they're told not everybody, heals that, but some people have. And then will you heal faster because of the different expectation? And I think yes. But so what they need to do is recognize what they don't know. A lot of medicine was carried. Do you know the hanging crepe philosophy?
No.
Okay, so this is way back when, I don't know, maybe the 19th century. When somebody was dying, they would hang black crepe. Okay, now, so the hanging crepe philosophy was, which made sense years and years ago, is you give people the worst possible set of circumstances, the worst prognosis, because then they won't be surprised, they won't sue you, the family, when the person dies. Right. And if the person lives beyond that, they're going to congratulate you. Right. Yeah. Exactly. But that was without realizing that the effects of these expectations actually have on our health. And so, so now it's sinful. They did this for insurance reasons, right? That if you tell people they're going to die and they live, great. You tell people they're going to live and they die, the family, is about to sue. But what people are told is very important. I don't think the medical world, I gave a talk the other day. There were about 5,000 people in the audience. I had no idea. I should have, but I had no idea how many of them were physicians. When I found that out, because I didn't know if I sounded very, and they loved it because again, they know they don't know, and it would be a relief for them.
Well, I can't let you go without asking you a bit about this book, right? Becoming an artist.
Ah,
And so, it was, I guess, later in life that you decided that you wanted to take up
yeah.
painting.
I was
And
50. I didn't decide. It just happened. I was in Provincetown and it was a summer where all it did was rain. So the tennis walks and everything else I might do, were washed out.
uh,
And then I tell the story of how I came to it. And it was wonderful. But the book itself is kind of fun because when I gave it to Random House, the title was Mindful Creativity.
mhm,
They changed the title to On Becoming an Artist. And at that point in my life, I was so excited about being called an artist. I thought, okay, great. But the book, it's got lots of my paintings in it, but it's really about interpersonal
yeah.
mindfulness. Uh,
Yeah, that's because I wanted to ask you. I mean, do you actually need to do something like painting or composing or something that,
yeah,
that is
no,
conventionally described as artistic to be
and no, it's
artistic
just
the way you describe?
well. First of all, what does it take to be an artist? Just do art, and you're an
Right.
artist. Don't paint by numbers. And how to be freed. I mean, open up a book and look at the paintings of horses over the years. They come in all sizes and shape. They're realistic. They're Picasso's horse. I mean, and so then you will be freed to do your own horse. And if you're not planning on making a living or selling them, what do you care anyway? Just have the fun in doing it. But I had suggested that for most of us, you see, I can tell you how to prevent mindlessness, which is to learn conditionally. No matter what you're told, 1 and 1 is 2, horses don't, you don't hear it that way. You say, yeah, typically. But you don't lock yourself in because as soon as you lock yourself in, you no longer notice deviations. You think and that's when the trouble starts. But changing, going from being mindless to mindful is hard because when you're not there to know you're not there. So that's why I think, the instruction, stop and smell the roses, be in the present. It's sweet, but it's empty because when you're not there, you don't know that you're not there. So again, you can't fix it. But if you were to throw yourself into some new activity, that without worrying about being evaluated, and you feel how good it feels to be totally engaged, and then just don't accept anything less than that. So the phone rings and it's Irving, and all of a sudden your heart drops. Okay, so you need to get rid of Irving or change your relationship with him.
Yeah, I
Uh,
mean, I think you can approach any activity with that
Yes,
mindset,
it
right?
certainly doesn't have to be the arts. The only
Yeah,
reason
you
I
can.
used the arts was not just because I just started painting myself at 50, but it was because people think the arts are a little more subjective, which is not really
Yeah,
true. I have people
right.
who say, oh, that painting is wonderful. Oh, that painting is awful. Not, I think it's wonderful or I can't stand it. In some absolute sense, it is. So you get the same evaluative, mindless judgments, even with art.
I
But it
think you
has
can
to be
approach.
something that's new for you.
Yeah, but I think you can approach housekeeping. You can approach
Everything.
cooking,
No,
anything.
I had this thing where I had these, they were sort of socks, but bigger than socks. I don't know. And I was dancing around the floor, dusting the floor essentially, and having such a good time with music on with these socks. So I decided, I wanted to make this a product. As I said, you and I need to go into business. And then, of course, I am surrounded by naysayers, and they told me all the lawsuits that would follow and so on. So I forgot the product, but I didn't forget, Dan, everything should be fun. Everything. And that's the mistake we have. We take, it's important to take what you do seriously, but I think the mistake people make is too often taking themselves too seriously.
Well, and I think you mentioned sort of the Tom Sawyer effect, right? Which I
Yeah.
call the got to get to, right? If
Yeah.
you think about everything that you've got to do and you think about it in terms of you get to do it.
Yeah, no, it's
really
perfect. It's perfect. That Tom Sawyer, to remind people, thought, wasn't he clever getting his friends to do his work and painting the fence? But he was only cheating himself because they had a good time with it. And an example I use is, especially now that we just got through the holidays, or the beginning of the holidays, actually, it's fun doing somebody else's dishes. You feel noble, you feel helpful, you feel respectful, you're giving back. Well, how could it be fun doing somebody else's dishes and not fun doing your own? You have to make it fun. And so whether it's fun, whether it's stressful, whether it's boring, none of these have anything to do with the event. It all has to do what we bring to the event. If you're bored, all you need to do is notice the way things have changed in whatever you're doing. If you're stressed, all you need to do is many things, but one thing that works is to notice how it's familiar. You have to give a talk, or you have to write a paper, whatever the project is, and it's brand new. That can make it exciting. You get stressed. Think of a way it's just like the last 10 you did.
Well, Ellen, thanks so much for joining. We didn't even get to talk about the workplace. Maybe your next book can be, the mindful workplace.
Yeah.
There's a lot of insights here on how to, create an environment where people are interested in, showing up for work and doing their best work.
For sure. I think the biggest mindless mistake about work is to see work as separate from life. And so everything that's said in all of these books, but most particularly in The Mindful Body, certainly speaks to how to be at work. And people also, so I've been asked by various important coaches, some of the major leagues in first in basketball, baseball, it doesn't matter. Anyway, the point is that much of the time when you're trying to help somebody on the field, the same thing as in the office, you ignore what was going on right before they started to play. So if they just had a fight with their wife, if they just overate, if they just, whatever, it's certainly going to affect them. And it's the same thing at work. Work doesn't start with with 9 o'clock and you enter the office. And so at the least, you can, regardless of the work environment, help yourself by following some of the suggestions that I lay out here.
Well, I'm not sure if this podcast is work or play. I think
for me, it's play. Everything is play.
Right? And so the book is called Mindful Body. Everybody check it out. But really, don't forget to go back and read Mindfulness, which celebrated its
Well, it was 25-year anniversary. I think about 5 years ago.
Yes, and now you got to do the 30th anniversary.
That's
and
right.
Also, Counterclockwise, great book, and on becoming an artist. Did Counterclockwise? I mean, you were in talks about making this into a
Jennifer Aniston was supposed to play me in the movie. She's delightful, and it was great fun for a while, but it never happened. It's interesting because, Greg, I live in the world of possibility, which is a wonderful place. I invite you to live there with me, because it doesn't matter what happens. When it doesn't happen, there's always something else that is about to happen. And there's a way of living your life so that you fall up. Mm-hmm. And it's a nice way to be.
Well, it might happen yet, so we'll see.
Yeah, no, they're talking about now an Apple series. I don't know. It's fun.
Well, hopefully we'll get a chance to talk again soon. Everybody check out The Mindful Body. Thanks so much, Ellen.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Unsiloed podcast is produced by University FM, elevating the stories of your institution.